Hey guys, Eric here, founder of DragonX, 100 million market cap token. I wanted to go through a quick presentation, a little bit about increasing your investing intelligence, specifically around crypto, um, and what I'm calling the duality of crypto investing. I think this is something that a lot of early crypto investors don't quite grasp, so I wanted to go over it so you guys had a bit of a better understanding. I hope this helps you separate yourself from the average crypto investor who is basically jumping from one project to another. They don't have an investing framework, and they don't really know how to analyze, enter and exit projects at the right times. So let's kind of jump into it here. Um, let's start kind of at the fundamentals. Uh, just ask yourself, like, what is intelligence, right? Just this is a very broad kind of like, I'm sure there's plenty of people who could debate me on this, but for the purposes of our discussion, I think it's fair to say that you could think of intelligence as an information and analytical filter that produces a certain informational result. So, for example, if you're analyzing a crypto project, um, how do you get a better informational result from the inputs? And and so, how do we increase our intelligence there? Right. That's kind of the question, because that ultimately is why you're here, to increase your investing intelligence so that you can make better decisions. So ask yourself, is there a filter we can apply to information, to upgrade our informational filter to help us arrive at a higher quality informational result? And I think there is, and that is the investing duality method, or framework, as I like to call it. Um, so let's get into this framework, and then I'll talk about how you can apply it in your own life. And I'll give you some examples of when I've applied it and been successful applying it. But before we kind of get into the specifics, I want to kind of help you understand how this method was and framework was derived. So to understand this, you need to understand a little bit more about psychology. There's this concept in psychology called the five-factor model. It's basically a specific psychological concept for categorizing different personality traits. It's called the five-factor model, also called the big five personality traits. Some of you are probably familiar with it. Just going over those really quick, just so you have an understanding of what those are. And I know some of you are not into listening to fundamentals. You just want kind of like the exact answer, but I'm telling you that by understanding the fundamentals, you'll be better equipped to apply these fundamentals on your own in different contexts. So understanding the fundamental concepts are actually very important. So getting back into the five major personality traits, we have openness, which is effectively interest and openness, and being open to new experiences and concepts. Agreeableness, which is your basically level of empathy, compassion, like your compassionate nature, or your competitive or antisocial nature. Conscientiousness, which is your organizational ability, your level of level of discipline, or your neuroticism, which is how you respond to stress, your level of emotionality. So just to be clear, this is a very broad generalization of human psychological traits and states. People have these in different degrees, and they are malleable. So none of this is like a prescription as to like exactly, about your specific situation. And in addition, none of these are really good or bad. They're just kind of different elements of human psychology. People have them in different degrees. And to emphasize that point, you can have someone who is very intelligent but extremely disorganized, like the quintessential, doctor with bad handwriting. And you can have someone who's just very unintelligent but is very disciplined, right? And is always showing up for their job on the same, very frequently, right? So they don't miss a day. So there's quite a bit of variation here, right? Correlation is not causation. So just keep that in mind. Well, one thing we can say, at least that does appear to be shown in psychological studies, is that openness, surprisingly, is actually the highest linked with IQ, most closely linked. And so that actually says something, because I think a lot of people would assume that extroversion or potentially even conscientiousness would be the one. For example, discipline or work ethic would be the one that's most closely correlated with intelligence, but it's not. It's actually openness. Okay, so keep that in mind, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to apply a psychological filter so that we have a more intelligent result when we're analyzing information, specifically crypto information, right, and specifically projects. So in that sense, you can get a sense for what potentially is the most important aspect of an analytical framework that we could add on to our own thinking to improve our ability to analyze projects and opportunities. So openness is kind of like the key filter. We could see that openness is the highest correlated trait, right? So this applies directly to our idea of investment duality, the investment duality method. I'll explain why in a second. It's because openness pertains to your ability to perceive and wrap your head around different angles of a concept, right? And your mental flexibility. Most importantly, and this is how I like to think about it, intellectually, it is your ability to own and reject the same concept. Okay, think about that. It's your ability to both own and internalize, but still reject the very same concept that you've owned and internalized. This is a pattern I see playing out over and over in crypto, which is most investors, they have one or the other. Okay, they're usually stuck. They're either able to take a very strong stance on something and fully embrace it, but never both, right? So they're either prevented from selling the highs, where there's the lowest opportunity and the least conviction is needed, or it prevents them from buying the lows, whereas that is where the highest opportunity and the most conviction is needed. So effectively, they're either followers, dedicated followers who are closely tied to the project, and they cannot detach themselves from the project. They might be wrapped up in their identity within the project. And that prevents them from making a rational decision when the market has decided that it's time to sell. And conversely, you have extremely cynical people. Those people, they usually are the ones who, if they are holding a token, they will usually sell it too early. But they usually are rarely the ones that buy very, very early. It's usually the people who are highly convicted and have internalized the benefits of the project that tend to buy very, very early, the true believers, so to speak. So the idea behind the investment duality method is it's forcing you to develop a conviction when the opportunity is high and eliminate conviction when the opportunity is low. So it is effectively the inverse of what I just described. It's the inverse of the negative. The negative is basically holding the opportunity holding the coin when the opportunity has decreased and it's time to sell, right? So to do this, we need to apply the investing duality method. And I've already kind of described what it is. But before you do that, you need to have some opportunities to evaluate. So in my last video, I described the traffic valuation framework and how traffic is a fundamental to analyzing a project. So that should be the basis for your research so that you can effectively find projects that have potential in their early stages. So that is covered to a degree in the first video that I did, the last video. Once you have those opportunities to analyze, then you're into the investing duality method and how to properly and abstractly just deal with the opportunities that's presented to you. So the first step in the investing duality method is to cultivate conviction, okay? So allow yourself to be sucked into the narrative of the project, right? Don't resist indoctrination. So if there's a founder that is extremely charismatic and does a very good job promoting his product, allow yourself to be sucked into that. Allow yourself to rest on every word that this founder says and to fully try to grasp the vision and ethos of the project. Be willing to entertain grand visions. Listen to the people that are the strongest proponents of the project. Try to understand their perspective, where they're coming from. Are they an early adopter? Are they one of the desperate masses that I talk about in my last video? And try to empathize with the people who are strongly convicted to the project and and go as far as believing that this is something that you would hold for the very long term, right? Years. And that is the first step in cultivating conviction and this gives you a real competitive advantage as I'm going to demonstrate. This is very different from people who approach projects in a purely cynical fashion because their frameworks will usually have them committing less than they potentially should while also selling earlier. So their profits might be significantly less or they may sell at a loss. Let's continue here. So cultivating conviction, you can consume content with the eyes of a true believer. Okay, this will allow you to fully understand the product, fully understand the vision, and the bar for this is: can you convince someone else to buy the product? Okay, can you convince someone else who does not know about the product and who is intelligent and who has the ability to discern quality? Can you convince them of the vision? Okay. If not, you're potentially not invested enough in understanding the product and its potential, right? And this is very different from what a lot of people will tell you. Often you'll be presented with a cynical framework for analyzing a project, but what I'm saying here is that you should dispense in the first element of this duality method. You must dispense with all cynicism. Otherwise, you will not fully engage with the potential of the project, and you will not be able to understand when the convicted players are going to sell, right? Or understand how long the convicted players are going to hold, right? So that's actually a disadvantage. So that the more open you are, right? And this goes back to the idea of an intelligent filter. The more open you are to the project, the deeper you will be able to analyze it and the more intelligent decision you'll be able to make about the project, right? Whether it be buying or selling. So then once you have a strong conviction, once you've really internalized conviction, you need to then and only then develop sell and bear cases, okay? So in spite of your firm conviction, you now need a thesis for selling. You need to know, based on what market conditions or price, you are going to make the decision to sell. And this needs to be done in an objective and skeptical way, not cynical, but skeptical. What you can do is you can apply the traffic valuation framework that I mentioned in the last video to ask yourself, putting the people who are of high conviction aside, what is the reasonable potential size of a project based on its axis? Like based on the axis that has two traffic and users, right? And that is something you should consider because usually the people who are the most highly convicted will overlook the downsides. And so now you fully understand why those convicted people are holding, but you need to now understand the specific setup and situation that you're going to play within this. And that's kind of where this traffic valuation framework can come in to help you understand what the potential upper limit of the product is in terms of adoption. So just ask yourself, like, what specific bullish or bearish event is on the horizon for the project, right? What are the downsides or invalidations of the thesis that you have for the project as a convicted user? Under what conditions would you cut and leave the project, right? So what would cause you to do that? Would it be a hack? Would it be a founder leaving? Would it be some macroeconomic event? Specifically, what macroeconomic factors might lead to invalidation? So if there's a war, if interest rates go to 4%, these kind of events that might basically prevent your project from flourishing, what are those factors, right? Write those down. And then look at the price targets for the most convicted users. What are their price targets? What's an unreasonable goal that they've set? What price are those that are convicted hoping for? You're going to want to aim below that, right? Because ultimately, it's very unlikely to hit those levels. So those are some, considerations, psychological considerations. And it's only effective to have these kind of cynical or skeptical overlays once you've actually fully internalized the potential of the project. Because then you're only then are you fully able to kind of apply these in an effective way. So the concept that I'm trying to convey to you here of this investing duality framework is to fully understand the position of the highest conviction player. Okay, and this is something that skeptical investors rarely do, but it's extremely valuable. So taking the mold, and the reason why it's so valuable is because taking the mold of a convicted player is how you get the best entries. Okay, so you can think about this like the true believers, the people that are there at the very beginning of a project. And by the way, if you use the traffic valuation framework, you might be able to find yourself at the beginning of a project, right? At the very inception of it. So now you have to ask yourself, if you're not fully convicted, are you going to be able to make that trade and enter that project? Because what you'll see time and time again is the true believers are the ones that get fantastic entries. But then, because of their conviction, they fail to sell and they fail to get the proper exit, right? So that's why internalizing the conviction of an early user makes all the difference, right? The other thing is there's kind of a comparative game to play here. If I could just go off tangent for a second, there's a comparative game to play. Because if you're developing conviction amongst a bunch of small projects that have yet to basically be recognized in the market, then you have a way of comparing them, right? Which project's the most sticky? Which project cultivates the most conviction? Which project has the most charismatic founder? In general, which project brings in the most true believers and retains them? And why? Right? So you get more down into the granular aspect of this, where you start to have a basis for comparison in the product's marketing, in the product's vision, in the product's communication of the vision, and the founder and the charisma of the founder. And all of those things will help you comparatively analyze early projects in a way that just, for example, blindly placing 10 bets will be probably less effective than using this model. For example, if you had 10 projects and you did nothing but cynical analytic research based on the traffic numbers, right? Like, for example, the traffic valuation framework is very analytical. It's based purely on the numbers. But for two projects, one each with 10,000 users, each one has 10,000 users, one of them will go up higher than the other, right? And the difference is probably in the subtle things that drive conviction. So you can really augment your analytical structure by adding this convicted element to it. Now, the other side of this is you need to dispose of this with your exit plan. So this is how you get good exits, right? So the other side is often the most cynical people, they're the ones that exit at the right time, right? Because they are able to detach themselves from the project. So you need to be able to develop that detachment at the right time. And that's the other side of the duality, right? So you need to be able to dispose of this mold with an exit plan, and that is how you get good exits. So you should establish an exit plan. So I'll give you an example of how I've used this with some risk-adjusted opportunities I was looking at on Sonic. So the first thing I did was I started to get interested in Sonic. I was leading my mastermind over to migrate capital into Sonic. I really drank the Kool-Aid completely. I listened to numerous founder streams. I got excited about the technology, and I was looking at all the priors and seeing how much potential there was in Sonic. So I fully embraced the Sonic ethos to the point where I was even tweeting about how great Sonic was on my account. Now that was a way for me to develop a strong conviction around the project so that I could start to do research and do the next step in the process, right? Which is look at the bear case and what could be. So effectively, what I did notice is that many people were potentially on Sonic for the airdrop. Now, the same thing happened on Blast, where, Blast had one of the highest TVL speeds to 2 billion market TVL. And it reached that because there was an airdrop. And once the airdrop was over, the TVL collapsed, right? So effectively, there was a bear case for Sonic where the Sonic airdrop would have a a negative effect on TVL once it was finished. So what I wanted to do was effectively, I wanted to get the sonic opportunity because I developed high conviction around it. But I had my bear case, I had my skeptical case. So I needed to hedge against that. So what I did was I established a middle ground for investment, and that was going into high yielding stablecoin platforms on Sonic that were earning 10, 20%, 10, 15, 20%, you could say, but also collecting the maximum Sonic points. So my mastermind went there with a risk-adjusted, positive, forward-looking, and optimistic, but risk-adjusted approach, where we effectively went after stable pools instead of volatile pools that would have potentially collapsed if people pulled TVL. And we got the Sonic airdrop released to us, and we did that without risking capital. So we only use stable coins. So the key was kind of to mitigate risk while embracing the benefits of this new opportunity, right? And I think this is a good example of how you can use this conviction and cynicism together to create a framework that is more effective for you as an investor, right? So this is kind of the framework. Use the traffic valuation model at first to source new projects, as we talked about in the initial video. Now, once you have those projects, you need to start by internalizing conviction on these early plays to fully understand the opportunity. Okay, and this will help you make comparative judgments relative to other early opportunities to see which ones are the stickiest and which ones have the most potential. This will give you great entries on high potential projects. But in order to maximize the opportunity, you need a framework for a bear case and an exit timing basically on every position. Right, and this is something we can go through in future videos. I want to keep these videos somewhat constrained in terms of timing, but effectively you need to have your bear case set out, and you need to have an exit position, an exit on every position. So I hope this model helps. It's a very general model, but I think that it lays the groundwork for you to make your own analytical decisions that help you improve your investing. So thank you for listening in. I'm going to be expanding on some of these concepts. For example, exit and entry timings, developing bear cases, and we can even go into more detail about developing conviction here. But thank you for listening. Appreciate it. Wanted to mention I have a mastermind. If you're interested in that mastermind, I'm coaching 80+ investors. We're developing opportunities together, 5, 10, 20x opportunities. If you're interested, you can see a link in the description below to get more information. If you're not interested, all good. Go ahead and apply this method and be a better investor. Thanks. See you.